Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Today it's all about commercial property, from office towers and retail properties through to industrial warehouses, student accommodation, data centres. So there's plenty going on in the commercial market. It's arguably more exposed to international forces than the residential market, arguably, which leads me to today's guest. Chris Bedingfield is the co-portfolio manager of Quay Global Investors, investing in real estate securities around the world. As always, this is general information only. You should always seek professional advice before making investment decisions. Chris joins me in the studio. Welcome back to Fear and Greed, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Great to be here again.
So we'll come to the normal commercial types, industrial and office and retail. Before we get there, though, we hear lots about data centres. We're increasingly hearing stuff about student accommodation. What are some of the lesser known opportunities in investing? Maybe not lesser known to you, Chris, but to people like me, a little bit outside the square. So can we start with data centres, because we hear so much about it? What's the outlook in Australia like, then globally?
Yeah, I mean, real estate, commercial real estate is very, very broad, and it includes those other sectors, as you mentioned. And data centres right now is having its day in the sun. If we went back 3 or 4 years ago, it was logistics and industrial when Amazon was going to take over the world and shopping centres were going to be no more. And now it's data centres, and the driver there's two big secular drivers. Everyone talks about artificial intelligence and the need for data center capacity there, and that's true, but there's also an underlying need for data centers for everyday businesses and commercial use and just general sort of business needs. And so those huge tailwinds are coming through at the same time that there is a lack of supply. And what you result of that is you're getting a nice squeeze between the landlord and the tenant. And as a landlord, that's what you want. And we're seeing some pretty strong rent growth pretty much everywhere. I think, when it comes to data centers, though, like most forms of real estate, it's easy to say, we should be in data centers, but it's a location thing as well. And what we're hearing more and more from, particularly from the big data center users, the big Amazons of the world and the Microsofts of the world, or Microsoft in particular, is they're choosing their partners, pretty carefully, and they're choosing their locations pretty carefully as well. So it's a strong sector right now, but like always in real estate, location and care does need to be taken into account.
I was talking to someone about data centres the other day, and they said the two reasons why some of the local listed guys haven't done so well recently: one, valuation, and particularly last year when they raised some money, but the second one was DeepSeek. Now, is that actually an issue, that AI being part of the reason that we need data centres? Is there a possibility that, cheaper options come out, less need for energy for data centers? Is that a risk?
I would be lying if I said, we know exactly what's going on across the other side of the world. But it raises a good point, and that is that in real estate in particular, there's always the risk of obsolescence. And as exciting and as interesting and, as good a story data centers is, it's a highly technical space. And, and I think along with that comes a little bit of caution. You compare that to something as boring as residential. I don't think that, 10, 15 years from now, we're not going to need a house or a home or apartment. But the question is, for something like data storage is, what are those risks, those sort of left field risks? And you have to be mindful of that. And I think anyone, they're geniuses if they know where it's all going to be in 3 or 4 years' time. What we are doing as an industry is we're watching the big hyperscalers very closely, reading their transcripts very closely. Are they still investing? Where are they investing? When do they pivot? Because that'll be the tell.
What about residential broadly, but let's go specific on student accommodation. What's happening in that sector? Again, we hear a lot more about that.
Yeah, it's a favoured asset class for private equity. If you go back 3 or 4 years ago, there was probably 6 or 7 student accommodation companies listed around the world. There's now 2 and soon to be 1. So they've all been taken private. There's one left, one of main size that's left, and that's a company this is in the listed space. It's a company called Unite. It's the largest student accommodation provider in the UK. And one of the big stories there is there's 2 big themes. One's been there for a while. One is that People need, there's a greater percentage of students finishing high school going to university. UK has some of the best well-known universities globally. And now with the second big theme that's emerged is, given the hostility, I guess, lack of a better term, of what's happening in the United States to some of the universities there, and particularly to foreign students, there is going to be, we expect, a real demand surge back into the UK. So a pretty good story there. And it's one of those asset classes that does extremely well in recessions, because, in fact, demand incrementally goes up because people defer going back to work and they continue their studies and the like. So, it's an interesting little asset class, yeah.
Stay with me, Chris. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Chris Bedingfield, Co-Portfolio Manager of Quay Global Investors. Chris, before the break, we were talking about student accommodation. What about residential more generally?
Yeah, so residential is extremely broad. You can put it into a couple of buckets. There's what's called standalone housing, which you can buy on listed exchanges around the world. So think of your house with, white picket fence out the front and yard. Then you've got apartments. So think of, anything from a 2-story, 3-story garden style apartment in suburban, Atlanta, up to, high-rise towers in New York. So you've got that. Then you've got manufactured housing, or what we would call land lease. And then a sector that doesn't get that much airplay, but is really exciting, is senior housing. And senior housing caters for anyone, you have really anywhere between the 70s and the mid-80s. Senior housing with assistance is very exciting right now, because at the end of the World War II finished about 80 years ago. So the first of the baby boomers is now turning 80, and that's a great demographic. So I quite often say to a lot of our investors who want to hear about data centers, it's like, you're missing a big, really, really good story here, because senior housing has as good a demand story as data centers. But the big difference is that in data centers, everyone's trying to build to meet supply or meet the demand. But in senior housing, starts are at 15, 16-year lows, and no one's really building. And so there's a huge squeeze going on. And some listed senior housing real estate companies are up 100% in the last 12, 18 months, massively outperforming data centers.
Wow.
And so, you can find these stories in global real estate more than you can in the domestic market, because we don't have it here. But there's a couple of really big companies in the US, Canada. I would caution people I wouldn't look at Europe just yet. Europe didn't quite have the same baby boom straight after the war as the United States or Australia or Canada, for obvious reasons. There was a big rebuilding that needed to occur. So the European demographic story is probably 7 to 8 years behind the US, but the US is happening right now. And the reason that no one's building them right now is the maths just doesn't work. The cost to build has gone up 40, 50% in the last few years. The interest rates have gone up. So developers are saying, well, unless I can get rents 30, 40% higher than they are now, we're just not going to build. Yeah. And the demand story is great. And the total returns have been very solid and probably likely to continue. So when you talk residential, it's very broad. Yeah. And there are some really interesting pockets in there.
Okay. So moving on from residential, you mentioned retail, and the death of retail was supposed to happen at some point about now. Yeah. It certainly hasn't.
No.
What's happening there?
No, it's a bit of a phoenix rising from the ashes, isn't it? It's interesting, isn't it? I think, what's happened is we had this thesis well before COVID, and no one agreed with us, and least of all the retailers. Prior to COVID, the retailers thought, you know what, we probably don't need as many stores, and we'll just go online and life will be great. And that strategy looked really, really clever, particularly during COVID. And then coming out of COVID, it seemed like everyone just got a little bit sick of staying at home and buying online, and we all wanted to go back into shopping centres again. And what also retailers discovered was that if you're going to be one-on-one online, you're basically taking on the pure online guys, the really big guys like Amazon, and they're going to beat you on price. They're going to beat you on distribution. They're going to beat you on service, and they'll probably throw in a streaming service for free on top of everything else, right?
Free delivery as well.
So if you're a retailer, you go, okay, well, I need to be online, but how do I differentiate myself? And the way to differentiate yourself is you need to be in shopping centres. But what's changed is if you go back 20 years, you needed to be in every major shopping centre and probably every medium-sized shopping centre across the country. 150 stores rolled out across the country. What's changing is that retailers are now saying, I just need to be in the top, 20 or 30 shopping centres in the country, but my stores will be bigger. And they'll be a point of contact for my customers who want to bring things back from online. I can showcase my new products, and I can have less staff but more skilled staff in the stores and helping. And if you think about that, it's kind of like what Apple's been doing for the last 20 years with the Apple Store. I mean, here's the quintessential tech company showing retailers how to do physical retail. And they've been doing it right for ages. And it's interesting that that's starting to happen now. And retailers who sort of jettison their stores are scrambling to get their stores back. And if you look in Australia and around the world, occupancies in shopping centres are back to well above where they were pre-COVID. And there's no space. And they're not building any more space. And so it's becoming quite difficult for retailers to get their space. And that gives landlords an enormous advantage. And not just a pricing advantage, it gives them a mix advantage. And what do I mean by that? It means that retailers who are really interesting, really exciting, that can draw more people through, they'll prioritise them over and above just trying to get anyone to fill the space. And so the shopping centres are becoming more, they're driving traffic better. And that traffic, of course, drives the sales. And so that whole cycle's working. So retail's good. I would caution that, going back to my point that I made before, retailers want to be in the top 20, 25, 30 stores. You really want to be careful about those mid-market shopping centres, those shopping centres that are not, the big sort of dominant ones. And so those are the guys that I think might be a little bit more at risk.
Chris, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me.
That was Chris Bedingfield, Co-Portfolio Manager of Quay Global Investors. This is the Fear and Greed business interview. Remember, this is general information only, and you should seek professional advice before making investment decisions. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news you can use. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.